Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Howard Stevenson, co-director of Forward Promise, a national program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Like many in our audience, the Forward Promise Village of grantees, fellows, and national advisors have been deeply engaged in responding to the multi-layered crisis created by the COVID-19 pandemic. Communities served by our Forward Promise grantees are some of the most vulnerable populations who have been hit hard by this crisis, perhaps none more so than our Native American brothers and sisters. In this conversation, we want to shine a light not only on the impact COVID-19 has had on their community, but also how their organizations are responding. And so with me today is Anpao Duta Flying Earth, co-founder and executive director for the Native American Community Academy, or NACA, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He is also the co-founder and executive director of the NACA Inspired Schools Network. Duta grew up on the Standing Rock Reservation in rural South Dakota and North Dakota. He is of the Lakota, Dakota, Ojibwe, and Akimel tribes. And we're so happy that you're with us today, Duta. Thank you very much. So I wanted to start out with some questions, and in particular, the first is really, what impact has the COVID-19 pandemic had on the community and populations that your organization serves?
Yeah, really good question, and just want to echo that I'm fortunate to be having this talk with you too, and definitely thank you to the organization, the Forward Promise, Robert Wood Johnson, for the support and in the rapid response that we've been doing to our communities. Right now, we're seeing that our communities are disproportionately affected by the sickness, both in the number of cases. The latest number, according to the New Mexico Department of Health, is that 56% of the positive COVID-19 cases are Native American, of which we are 10 to 11% of the population. So much of this is due to the number of the cases rising on the Navajo Nation and some of our pueblos. So the impacts that we're really seeing is that our families are having a tough time accessing education opportunities that we're providing through our schools, through our networks, because they're trying to just meet the basic needs of everyday life, whether that be food, supplies, access to healthcare. And as a result of the impact, the economic impact that we've seen, we're seeing that a lot of our families have lost their jobs. We've seen a lot of our families are actually the ones on the front lines as the essential workers, either like as the builders, as the cleaners, as the distributors of some of these food and supplies. And so we're seeing a large impact. And I will mention that part of our response is to figure out who else on our team or who else in our network of partners is experiencing something similar. So I just got off of a call with our partner, the New Mexico Dream Team, in which we've partnered together to meet the needs of Native American and undocumented families and community, of which are the hardest hit in New Mexico. So, yeah, Dr. Stevenson, that question is one that is really prompting us to dig deep of where do we find the hope, resilience, power, agency, and choice in this moment, and how will we respond? And so our response has been threefold. One, how do we get some stipends, some payments out to families? Two, how do we give the response in the form of food? And then three, what sort of supplies do families need? Everything from cleaning supplies to access to clothes, access to healthcare, and then maybe like 3B is what resources in our community are available right now. So tomorrow, one of our health clinics is gonna going to offer 400 tests. And so we've specifically outreached to our community in Albuquerque to take advantage of that. So that's a little bit of what we're doing.
Well, I mean, thank you, brother. I mean, frankly, when you describe that rate of 55, 56% compared to 11% of the population, that's one of the higher ratios, even among communities of color, that I've been hearing about across the country. And so, and again, I don't think with all the talk about racial disparities, no one in the public view is talking about this very directly, about the differences within racial groups, among racial groups. How have you had to change, if at all, the work internally with your staff, or how you provide the services? You've hinted at it a little bit already, but you know, have you had to do any things internally differently?
Yeah. The connection with families has probably been the one that we've had to think through. What does it look like now? So our schools are really using their advisory structures, teacher structures as a form of outreach to social emotional wellness and well-being, and also just making sure that we're connected, that we're being a good relative in the network. And so I think that has really been an emphasis in terms of like, how do we make sure that we're still connected? How do we make sure that we know that our families know we're here? The other one is really kind of the special sauce of who we are, and that is an education entity that's dedicated towards Indigenous education, and it's really like the basis on not an either or model of either culture or academics, but a all of it and holistic wellness kind of piece. And you know, to be quite honest, there's been a bit of a challenge for all of our schools, and now that, you know, we've released the continuous learning plan for students to be able to access online modules for learning. How do we maintain that same sort of cultural relevance and nuance of our curriculum? Which is, you know, it's been a challenge for sure. And how do we make sure that it's not just some sort of one size fits all access to a curriculum plan, and because that's really been part of the flagship of what we've built over the past 15 years, is that our families and students have access to culturally relevant, responsive, and excellent curriculum. So we are you know, kind of going back to the drawing board on it. And I think we've thought of it in multi-levels of that. There's an additive approach of enriching curriculum with content that is more relevant. There's also, if we move up the stages of multicultural or Indigenous education, we want to get to the actual transformational level. That will require really kind of the agents of change being the students by way of families, and that you know, so we are committed to thinking that through, and it's a challenge right now. And so our teachers are back to the drawing board on that, of like, what does it look like if and when we launch into a school year that may not be available to meet in person? So stay tuned to what we're going to produce, but we're going to spend the next few months figuring that out.
Wonderful. I know you all have done a wonderful job also of trying to measure the benefits of the curriculum and the work you're doing. Do you see the new ideas and the new planning for your teachers related to thinking intergenerationally in a particular way? Are there ways in which you've had to adjust, you know, since there's less issues around social distancing? Does it throw off cultural rituals or other forms of the basic values you've had for your work for so long?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It takes me two different ways, or maybe not different, but it makes me think of two things. One is it has made us take a step back in terms of what are those processes and protocols and traditions in the community that had to be put on pause. So actually, a lot of our Pueblo relatives here in the state have had to pause on their dances and their feasts, um, of which are celebrating, deities and saints in their belief. And um, we're having to think, if I think about back home and our network schools in South Dakota and network fellows in South Dakota, we're having to rethink, some of our summer traditions and summer protocols. Is it safe to gather? Is it safe? And then if not, what's available per individual and per family? So the second thought, and maybe a little bit related to that, is my uncle was recently telling a story on Facebook Live, and my uncle's maybe in his mid 60s right now, and he told a story of my great grandmother. My great grandmother's name was Eva Flying Earth, and she was a nurse. I'm not totally clear on whether or not she was a nurse during the 1918 pandemic, but the story, as he told it, was that our family was affected, and that she was the sole survivor of our family. And it made me think that if not for her, I wouldn't be here.
Wow.
And something that she did, the resilience, the power that she held, made it possible for me to be sitting here talking with you. And that how will I also leave a legacy for my as an ancestor to the future generations, in which they can think back that hopefully, that I'm not the sole survivor of our family, but that it's part of the narrative of who I am in connection to my community. And so I think there is some power and agency to be taken and to be gathered from our stories, that though this is unprecedented in our lifetime, that our ancestors have gone through similar things, and have gone through pandemics and sicknesses and epidemics, and we're still here, right? We're here in the present, and we have been for a long time. And so how do we draw upon those our own history as a point of resilience, as a point of perseverance, as a point of responsibility, quite honestly. So that, we're really thinking of that, and moving forward, what is it going to look like to help our community heal, but and also to use our history and resiliency as a point of pivot and power.
Yeah, I just feel I get strength from hearing that story just as you tell it. My goodness. If you think about now, more people talk, they might not know the specifics, but it's been pointed out to them that this COVID-19 has revealed these structural disparities regarding colonialism and racism. They're kind of stark right now. How have you seen these kind of disparities play out in your work?
Yeah. Yeah, there's kind of like the victim narrative that exists, right? Like, and it's hard to kind of to ignore it. I mean, even in the number, it's hard to not think of our community as a victim when you're thinking about 50%, 56% of the cases. And if we add in our Hispanic and Latino relatives, we're looking at 77% of the cases in New Mexico are impacting our communities. And so I think, we wonder, is there a predisposition towards this sickness? And in some cases, some of our political figures have come out and made statements that have been a little controversial to that end. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that there's a predisposition according to our own genetic makeup towards a certain sickness. I do think there is systemic inequalities and equities that have existed for generations that are contributing to the apprehension towards some of our systems and institutions like healthcare and treatment and wellness. And I think that is a contributor to it. There's also, I think, part of it is where do we have access to some of the opportunities that would enable the safety of our families. And I think you know, when as a community we're facing such factors of homelessness and access, you know, or in access to quality food and quality healthcare, you can't help to think that those are contributing factors to why our community might be experiencing disproportionate rates. You also think about the whole structure of colonialism as it ties to reservations. As some, you know, like reservations are essentially they could be seen as concentration camps in the sense that there are borders to that. And at one point in our history in the late 1800s, we were literally round up and put on these plots of land. And you know, I think there's something to be said about the physical architecture of reservations, the physical kind of planning and structure of reservations that are in part contributing to the rates of spread, right? And also like the same sort of numbers. There was a youth that went live on, I think, Instagram or TikTok, and it was comparing the Navajo Nation to West Virginia because they're comparable size, and the number of grocery stores, hospitals, and jails is pretty appalling, right? And so even just comparing to a state like West Virginia, you see that there are far fewer number of hospitals and grocery stores, and there are more structures of justice structures of jails and detention centers, things like that. So those jump out in my mind, and I can't help but think that, you know, that this time is exacerbating some of that. And I'm always moved to focus on, well, where does the power lie in that same sort of frame, and where does our strength lie? And that's where I dig deep into the stories of my own family.
Right. Thank you. Do you see any potential for opportunities given the knowledge of these kind of disparities for the future or even for the near term?
Yeah, I mean, I hear a few of my friends talking about the new normal, or not going back to the former normal. And I, as a school leader and as a nonprofit leader, I'm asking myself, what is the iteration, or what is the evolution of the work look like? And I can't help but think there is some power in digging deep into our own stories of articulating what is this actually going to look like moving forward. So as it plays out in schools, how do we think about self-sustainability or resilience in the structure of lessons, right? And there have been a number of families and communities that have gone back to self-sustaining lifestyles. And so what does it look like to have a relationship with the land? I don't think that always means that you're living off the grid in the mountains, only relying on solar power. But I think it means something like in your backyard or in a part of your home, are you growing some of the things that you can eat? And then what is the genius of that sort of discipline, right? Like to understand the relationship that you have with plants, and to also understand the medicinal properties and the nutrition behind it. Like, how can you gather some power and some like genius from that? And so I think there's a lot, right? Like there's a lot of like these self-sustaining practices that we can start to think about that are breaking down the structures that are creating some of these inequities, and actually allowing us to step in as individuals, families, and communities into a place that we've always known, and it's in our history.
Yeah, beautiful. And I appreciate that, and I think if we targeted, because some of our work together is around how you serve boys and young men of color, and you think about the pandemic, what do you think is needed now to serve that particular group?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this just because, you know, at one point I was a boy, and I like to think of myself as a man now. And I think, you know, like our structures that I grew up with, I was fortunate to be raised back on the reservation. And I say fortunate because it's our land base. Even amongst the critiques that I just said about like are these like in essence concentration camps, but it's our land base, right? Like the connections to our land. And I was raised differently than my mom and my grandma, my mom was raised in LA, and my grandmother was born in Idaho, and they were products of relocation and boarding schools, and they made a conscious decision to bring me back. And I think that some of the structures that I've realized is that our young men and boys need a multi-tiered approach, and I think now more than ever. And so some of our traditional indigenous structures were one in which there was physical activity teamed with social emotional release. The social emotional release primarily existed as dialogue and oratory. The physical release, you know, I think that's well evidenced in terms of you know, getting, you know, like the running and the actual like the fitness that one had to embody in order to be considered passing through different rights within their life. And I think the one that has been largely non-existent for, you know, and certainly for me has been the permission, the forum, and the ability for the emotional release. And I think now in this time, in this stay-at-home or kind of shelter-in-place orders that we have, a lot of us as boys, young men, and men are looking in a mirror at ourselves. And how do we emphasize the social, emotional wellness and well-being in this time that is also allowing for the release? And I think that's a major need. And you know, I know with our team on the NACA side and on the NISN side, we're thinking about like what are those needs that we can help think through in a divergent way, like through like similar town halls or similar type of huddle structures through online platforms, or even what does the mindfulness look like in this time and moment, and urging folks to in essence call their spirit back from projecting into their computer and be present in the here and now, and to actually sit on some land if it's available, and to be in self, and to ground yourself amongst all the fear and hysteria that may exist about the time that we're in now with the pandemic. So I think like you're seeing communities kind of activate. You're seeing individuals and families get out and be present in the physical and even the fitness piece. And so I know for us as an organization, we're actively thinking and projecting into the wellness piece, and how do we make sure that we're showing up for the young men and boys that we're serving.
Yeah, thank you. I if we were to say, you know, all the things you've learned, you were to make recommendations for other organizations on how to navigate this space, what would it be? Your mindset.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what is the genius of the local community, and how do you surface that and bring that alive in a way that is providing agency to the young men and boys that they're serving? I think a lot of the folks that are in partnership with Forward Promise are doing a lot of the work, and I would urge partners to stay into the frame of not I would urge partners to not succumb to the victim type of paradigm, but to operate out of what is the genius of the community and what is the genius of the individual that can be surfaced in this time. And I think, like, there's one of the things that I've learned from folks on your team, Dr. Stevenson, is like, how do you at some point step out of the way of the boys and young men in a way that is like allowing them to blossom and flourish in their own power. And so I would, as somebody who benefited from that same type of advice, I'd want to reflect that to folks who are in the work team.
Wonderful, wonderful advice. When we were starting Fort Promise, I had the misconception, because of understanding the different communities of color and their particular needs, that for Native Americans, land was so important and that it was unique to Native American communities. But the more I started rereading history and listening to you and others and among our grantees, that we've all been beset by the stealing of land, and our hearts and our minds and our souls connected to those lands. And I think I just had, just angry at my own miseducation at not seeing those larger connections. And hearing you and others talk about it just helped to remind and revive us to not give up on fighting for that as well. And because it's part of our history, part of our culture, part of our soul. I have been listening to you. My soul feels peaceful just listening to you, even through this crisis. I'm glad you shared with us. And thank you so much for coming and talking.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, thanks for taking the time, Dr. Stevenson. I appreciated it. And if there's anything I can do, definitely reach out and let me know if I can be of service.
Beautiful, man. Thank you, Duta.
All right.